Alright, and hello. Welcome to the Delirium engine. This is our first episode, so the production values are liquefied crap.
Good save. Good save.
Thank you. And with me today, and hopefully in the future, will be Swampy.
Hello.
I am... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Hello, listeners. Hopefully you're having a good time this fun family day.
Listener, maybe. Maybe one.
Did I say viewers? Did I say...
You said listeners.
Okay, good.
You just assumed that we actually have people listening.
Well, I could just be speaking to myself at this point because I'm probably gonna regurgitate this afterwards, after the fact.
That's fair. And I'm Mekhalikhar, or Demir, or whatever you want to call me. It's fine. So today we are doing, like I said, the first episode for Welcome to the Delirium Engine. This is a show that talks about tabletop gaming. Specifically, at least in this series, it's going to be Dungeons and Dragons. And just to put a bit of backstory behind this, I've been sort of playing this game for roughly 20 years. I would dare say that my university career had more to do with playing Dungeons and Dragons than computer science or art.
So what we're also saying is all authoritarian arguments are being taken place from the grounds of academia at this point.
That's the hope.
That's the hope. All right, there we go.
but not to be I would argue, if I had to establish some credential, that I am probably as close to a master's of tabletop gaming as you're probably gonna get.
I almost think that D&D almost has a bit of sociology to it, if I were to put human sciences behind it.
Probably.
Yeah.
And psychology.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure. You got. I find that people who dabble in Dungeons and Dragons dabble in a lot of things all over the place. They're kind of fonts of infinite useless wisdom, or they always know enough about any given subject to be dangerous, but they never actually know enough to be credible.
And I think today's argument, as provided by the title, I guess
we haven't gotten to the argument yet.
All right,
that's the next screen.
Okay,
but like I said, so credentials aside, because they're not really important, and who the fuck cares about credentials? Swear words. Who cares about credentials when it comes to playing tabletop games? Everybody thinks they're a bloody expert, and we're hopefully going to prove them wrong, or at least I am. Swampy, who is right now my counterpart, he's probably going to be arguing against my theories. And so this brings us once again to the sort of closing of this intro to this series. In my university career, I wrote a series of rules called Rules for Successful GMs. I also wrote Rules for Successful Players. There's about 7 of each, officially and unofficially, and I recodified them recently. And so each episode is going to deal with one of these rules. So, without further ado, we're going to go and talk about the first rule. And to be fair to me and to everybody else, the rules are written to be controversial. So this is not. So rule number 1. This is rules for GMs. Your plot is stupid, and it doesn't matter.
That's a good catch, because a lot of people are obviously going to be quite mad, which I had explained I had actually mentioned the title to a few people who we game with and other people outside of our gaming circle, and the amount of frothiness upon their lips was abundant.
I used to run the gaming club. Basically, I used to be the president of the gaming club in university, and let us just say that some of these ideas made some people very unhappy with me, and they can all go to Hades because they're all wrong, and I'm going to try to prove it. What this is just to sort of keep going with what we're actually doing here. This is my theory. My sort of critical theory of gaming, I guess. And what I'm trying to do is have these discussions, these raw discussions, in order to sort of figure out the truth of these rules with other people who are GMs. Swampy is probably the most popular GM that I think our gaming group has, and I would say that I used to be the most popular GM that I ever, like, I don't know, I get anytime anyone plays a game with me, it's all about praise, you know, whatever. But I'm not gonna blow my own horn because that's just fart sniffing. Swampy's an excellent GM. His opinion is extremely valuable to me, and we also have some Skype chats, or not Skype chats, Discord chats from our local gaming group that they're very crusty about this because they're all plotists, we'll call them.
and though I am I guess a plotist, I do actually agree, like, with some, like, out of this podcast that you and I've had some discussions, and I actually do agree with a lot of the points you made. So, I'd say this is more of a discussion more so than a debate.
Yeah, we're not going to debate because debates involve a little bit of argumentativeness, and I'm going to try to avoid that. And in fact, what I'm going to do, if you'll excuse my total unprofessionalness, I am going to provide my co-host here with a pencil.
Nice.
And some paper so that we can facilitate a discussion that doesn't involve us interrupting each other. Not because he is, but because I am notorious for interrupting people. Because I need to say my piece. So the hope is I'll just write down the points and discuss them later.
From my understanding too, we this is going to be I guess a two-man round table at this point.
Yeah, and hopefully in the future we'll have multiple people. We've got some other very good GMs, and I would argue most of them are plotists. I'll call them, just for lack of a better word. They're pro-plot.
Kind of reminds me of identity politics, but in D&D.
Yeah. So let's jump into it. Let me explain the rule first, because this is, like I said, the line here is meant to be controversial sounding. So I have to go into it. So first things first, your plot. We're talking about the GM's plot, not the players, not anybody else.
Right.
Your plot. Okay? Plot itself is not what we're discussing here. We're talking about an individual GM's plot. So, using the word stupid, you know, it's a little bit hyperbolic, but I put it there because it's supposed to be a slap in the face, right? And the idea is that the GM needs to shut up, listen, and understand that, and then humble themselves before the game that they're running. Okay, so and saying that their plot is stupid and it doesn't matter is really just saying that your personal plot, your ideas about what this story is going to look like, is not important, and in fact, you shouldn't even be considering it.
Okay.
All right, in a linear sense. Okay. Any comments on what I've just said?
Well, I think that like, overall, when I think of plot, like, prior to this cast, I typed in D&D plot in YouTube, for example.
Okay.
And the amount of material on there informing people on how to have quality plot, how to have plot hooks, how to bring people in, and how that incorporates with both setting and atmosphere are pretty. There's a fair amount of videos on there, and I do enjoy seeing that, not in the sense where it kind of validates my DM styling and standpoint, but more so in the sense that it's important to people. I think that plot serves a very strong purpose in a campaign. I think it serves a really strong purpose in setting atmosphere, and it sets a precedence too of a beginning and end, right? With that in mind, though, a plot can also be fluid, because not every player is going to want to follow your storyline. Not every player is going to. No one likes playing a game on rails. I think if you're going to have a plot, it should certainly not be. I don't think it should be closed. and I think you should have some open ends. The way I tend to do things myself with my plot is I know how I start the game, so I'm going to create an atmosphere through that, create a precedence, explain my setting, and I know how I want it to end. So I know where the villains are. And one of my big things, though, too, in a world or setting, if you're doing world building, one of my personal rules is have that world ongoing regardless of the player's actions. If the players are sitting at a bar drinking for the next 3 months, well, the world doesn't change, right? Well, sorry, the world does change by its own means. The players have no really effect on it. The idea, though, of a plot kind of being open and fluid, where the players can have an effect on that, I think is something that is immersive. It's entertaining, and it gives the players a sense of power. That's where also plot holds a fair amount of significance. Without having a set series of goals that have been and challenges put in front of them via plot, which is a series of events, obviously, then there's almost no personal meaning behind character. But if I were to say anything, I think it is also up to players to create meaning behind their characters as well. And almost, for example, that's why backstory is important. Having a backstory where people want to... Having a backstory where you're able to incorporate it into the setting or into the narrative where your DM can kind of cater to that, even if it's anything from personality quirks, all those things are structured into almost like the definition of plot. So that's my perspective.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna hit some points there.
Okay.
And so it'll allow us to sort of delineate, I guess, what I'm talking about when I say plot.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start with going through your points, and then I'm going to give some examples of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Okay. So you're talking about plot hooks, which is like inciting incidents and things like that, right?
Yeah.
I would argue that should happen in the pregame.
Okay.
All right. Because you and let me give you know what? I'll change my format here. You know, this should happen in the pregame, and a plot hook should happen in the pregame because, and one of the things that all these rules sort of try to do, one of the other rules, but we won't get into it, it wants to avoid the tavern trope. And the tavern trope is we have a series of disjoint characters, all with their own motivation / lack of motivation.
Yes.
Arriving in a point, usually a tavern, and an ogre attacks something or some other dumb inciting incident that the GM just randomly pulled out of its butt. And then the PCs decide that they need to solve the incident because they want to play the game Dungeons and Dragons and not because their PCs actually care. And then congratulations, you're all part of a party now, and the GM, and continue story. And what this creates, well, first of all, this plot is usually uninteresting, almost in every scenario with the characters. You know, other than like maybe the show and tell that players get by showing off their characters for the first time.
Yeah.
But what I find more often than not happens, unless your core group is very like they know exactly what's going on. And actually, this is one point I wanted to mention. Any arguments I want to completely disregard for this and the rest of the series, any arguments of if your player base is good.
Yes.
Right? Like, or if your player base is solid, or if everyone agrees to it. Right? Because these are arguments that basically mean there are no arguments. Like, there's no way of improving anything because everything is subjective, and it's not.
Can I interject for a moment?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned pregame and the tavern trope, and that is something that when I first started GMing, I ran into a fair bit of. For example, you say you have a chaotic evil sorcerer and you have a lawful good paladin. Yeah. And they're in the same bar, they're doing their thing, and where is the motivation for them to stop this mythological...
If you're playing old D&D, the paladin has to kill the chaotic evil guy. He can't even party with him. It's not allowed. Yeah. He loses his paladin.
And yeah, exactly. And I played with this one individual that he'd always play a paladin, and his first thing he would do is go after the evil characters that was obviously evil, had the call sign of Asmodeus like embedded into his forehead, and it is so problematic, especially when you're starting off, because no one wants to get smited, banhammered right in the face, like right in the tavern.
The trope I like to use for the tavern trope I love is everyone plays shadowy loners.
Yeah.
There are 4 corners in the rooms and 5 players. One player doesn't get to have a corner.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing though is like when I first started DMing, you gave me an interesting tip where it's like figure out why they're all together at first.
Yeah.
Which is I think really like in terms of pregame extremely important.
Yeah. This is the point that the pregame is a thing. Like I find that a lot of GMs. And I've talked to a good deal of them. Like they don't even understand what the pregame is. And the pregame is literally get your shit together. The players need to get their shit together. And this is one of the few times where it is on the players to do this job, not the GM.
And you know what? I think too in terms of like pregame, one thing I kind of developed for a few of my games, if I were to say run a, you're in a, say once again you're in a tavern, you've all decided why you're there or whatever. Let's say you're unified again, like you've all been conscripted. You're part of a unit, and you're on your way to do some militia-based stuff or whatever. Yeah. Setting that precedence in that pre-game too of what your character is like. One of my favorite things to do is get each of them to tell a former adventure or quest or some type of like feat your hero or character has done. And it sets up precedence of this is what my character does. This is how they handle the situation, and that's one of the. It almost sets like that cornerstone of role play where it sets your character's atmosphere, right? Like what their precedence is, what their goals are, etc. And previously you had mentioned to me goals being really important.
I think we need to stop on goals for players because that's one of the rules for players.
Yeah,
that's an entirely different episode. But like I understand your point.
Yeah, but it's. Thinking about pregame, though, I think that having those things, having your strong character backstory and understanding of what your character does, is very important. For it as a DM, I find it really important to incorporate that in this plot, right?
What I generally do when I GM, to avoid the tavern trope, is I'm like, before I even start playing, because I don't really care what we run, what we play. What do you collectively, as the players, want to play?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to be bandits? Do you want to be pirates? Do you want to be in space? You know, I thought we were playing D&D, but heck, you know, maybe we're playing Buck Rogers now, or Star Wars. Like, who cares? Like, what do you guys want to play? And if they can all figure out what they want to play, generally speaking, the game will start without a hitch. You can just jump right into it. You're just like, you guys are the grand pirates of XYZ, and, you know, the dark pirate, you know, and the plot hook becomes easy, because they've already accepted what they want to do. Like they've accepted their plot. And this is the part where I think I want to sort of touch on what we're talking about when I talk about GM plot versus player plot.
Okay.
So the example I would like to give here is the GM plot. So this is the no plot. Okay? GM decides, okay, players, you're all together. The great dragon Wrathion, whatever the hell his name is, he's stolen the princess. And it's up to you to save the princess.
Yeah.
So your 4 shadowy loners that that your players have created all decide that Wrathion is too big a deal, and they're going to go to the town over. What do you do? You're the GM. What do you do?
Well, if my players decided that, you know what,
your plot is stupid.
My plot is stupid, and okay, so if they know that there's something going on in the world, and they want to collectively go stop it for gold, glory, and whatever. Or meanwhile, like the thing that I've created in my setting and in my world is still going on.
Yep.
That thing still happens.
Yep.
It has to, because now I've set that precedence that it did.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Now, my players go F off and slay the dragon, but
they don't slay the dragon.
Well,
I said in this example they don't.
Well, if they let's say okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
They leave. They say, I don't want to slay your dragon. I don't care about the princess. The princess is ugly and the dragon is stupid. We're leaving.
Yeah, and that's the thing though, is that's
what next?
That almost to me seems like a poorly written thing.
Okay, well, you spend 8 years of your life writing the perfect story, a fucking novel. Damn it.
Flipping.
A flipping novel. You write the most beautiful flipping novel. You know what? Game of Thrones? Put to shame.
Okay.
Okay? And you're all like, dear travelers, You are now on the grandest and most epic quest of all. Here you go. You align yourselves. Shadowmoor, the loner. Thorzorak, the orcish loner. Maymar, the elven queen. Ex-queen.
Loner.
Who hates all men and women. And Therazul, the great wizard who cares only for books. You have assembled here at the, at the heels of Mount whatever the hell, and the grand story, I have spent 8 years of my life writing this story, and then the players go, we want to go to space.
See,
and then your plot goes, oh, well, there's 8 years of my life thrown out the ba 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 ba, and just to touch on your point here, like a fluid series of antagonists and then like setting specific structures, we'll call them.
Yeah.
So like churches and gods and all this other stuff, and like in the example with the dragon, the great dragon Rathion here, he is a figure.
Yes.
But he's not the plot. So in the GM's mind, the plot, or at least the plot as I visualize it from like a GM plot, is the players start at the tavern. The players travel to the dungeon. From the dungeon, they go to level 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm writing little dots here just to show that these are points on his chart. Yeah. And then he reaches at the end the grand epic battle with Rathion. And then they fight that, and maybe they lose, maybe they win, depending on how the GM wishes it goes. And it's like, let's say they're supposed to lose the first battle, and then they leave and they go find a wizard in a tower. Like it goes. You can build this grand arcing plot, this whole great plan, and you see it all the time in modules that you used to be able to buy, and I'm sure you can buy them again still. Like I'm sure there's modules everywhere.
There's a lot of homebrew
that
stuff
it's all
nowadays.
Like here's point A to point B to point C to point D, and like here's your path you need to travel. And there's a trope, and it's still a relevant trope, called the plot T-Rex. Which is like, if your PCs leave the designated path of their beautiful Dungeons and Dragons game, a giant T-Rex will show up and eat them, or a fireball, or a wall, or whatever. And this gets into another one of our rules later on. But
funneling and punishing.
But you end up basically you start shoehorning your PCs into a plot that they may or may not want to be part of, and we're going to assume that they don't, because in any given game where you have produced your GM plot and the players are all on board, then it's their plot.
Yes.
They've adopted it. It's their plot. But as soon as it's not their plot, it's your plot. And you want them to go on your plot. And your plot is stupid. And it doesn't matter.
Okay, and I get the relevancy of what you're saying. Because the thing is that if I have played games where I have made a character that was very simple. He was very brutish, and people wanted to start a business. My Strahd the uncouth barbarian does not have any understanding of economics. He is not civil to people. He is also not a good person.
Yeah.
He also has no care of business because he gets his gold through power. So why the hell would he care? So then I end up having to my character would then act it out, venture off and search for his own glory and his own gold. Right? Now I'm separated from the party because now we're not in collaboration for a common goal.
Yeah, there's no party cohesion there.
Yeah.
And if the entire party, because now we're talking about player plots. So if you've got 4 players, you got 5 players in a group, 4 players want to start a shop, and the 5th player doesn't. Strictly doesn't. And in your case, I would say doesn't have the imagination to try to stay with the party. If that's the character they want to play, how would you shoehorn your way? Like if you're just like, I cannot see my character staying. There's no way.
Well, that's the thing though too, and there's a point though. And I'm not saying imagination, because the thing is that there's a point though.
Yeah, I misspoke. That's not what I meant.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. There's a point though where, in the example of the paladin and the evil sorcerer all in the same group,
the paladin can't
coexist.
Yeah,
and that's the thing, is that the purpose of, just because a plot just because a story arc or a plot or whatever going on happens doesn't necessarily mean the players have to be agreeable with it, which which is what I'm hearing you saying. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like just because I have something out there as a DM doesn't necessarily mean the players have to go with it.
Yeah.
If there's a player plot doesn't necessarily mean that the players all have to want to go with it.
No,
which tends to separate the party, which is something honestly as a DM you sometimes have to be prepared for.
This is where the player cohesion is important. But like, let's assume that you had player cohesion and 4 out of 5 players want to do a thing and the 5th player doesn't. Right?
Yeah.
So I guess my advice in this situation would simply be to either negotiate the uncouth. What was his name?
Strahd.
Strahd the uncouth. Okay, Strahd. Well, you're the odd man out. I'm not going to run an entire session just about you.
100%. Why should
you?
you?
But if you tell me what you want to do, I can give you a series of rolls to make, and then I'll tell you. Or maybe like when everybody's having a thing, you're just like, Strahd, what's going on? You spend maybe 5-10 minutes on Strahd every so often, and you're just like, you would have encountered terrible troubles here. How do you solve these troubles? Make a roll or two. And then it's like, oh yeah, you countered these things. These little meanwhile vignettes.
Yes.
And then Strahd can be part of the game, and he'll come back later because you don't care about starting a shop, but you are still friends with everybody. You'll be back when conveniently, the shop is done and everybody's finished that goal.
Yeah, exactly. And
you just might have to take a back seat.
Yeah, and then the thing is though too is that it's like I'm looking at your point about GM plots versus PC plots.
Yeah.
Now, my question to you is that with doing a comparative of both, in your opinion, are PC plots far more important than a GM plot?
They are the only thing that matters.
They are the only thing that matters?
In terms of plot.
Okay.
The only thing that matters. GM plots are irrelevant. Mm-hmm. Like, the way... Okay, so... Like I said, rather than having, and I remember when I'm talking about plots, I'm talking about a series of connecting events that the GM wants.
Which is the definition of a plot.
Yeah. Okay. So, if your GM is taking these events, disconnecting them, and having them out in the ether as things as like barriers that are growing or shrinking and things like that, like as sort of NPCs that are doing their own thing outside of the player's view. And like as a result, barriers and or stuff happens in the background. Sure, like, but that is the GM plot is nothing more than setting. Mm-hmm. All right, and they're individual pieces out in the ether. Okay, the players are choosing to interact with these plot events, these plot bubbles. Yeah. I guess like these setting bubbles. So, Wrathion the Dragon, the PCs may choose to slay Wrathion the Dragon, and they may choose to seek out a Great Sage, and the Great Sage is in that other bubble over there. They might do all sorts of things, learn about the setting, go to a library, whatever. Like, all of these things might exist.
Yeah.
Right? And the GM doesn't have to plan these things. In fact, it's actually, it's less work for the GM not to plan it, and then it works better if they don't plan it, and they just play reactively. Which is another one of the rules, I think, in the player section, if I remember correctly, is GMs are reactive and players are proactive. But anyway, we won't go into that. That's another episode.
Yeah.
So plot for the players is paramount.
Yeah.
Meaning that each player has a story that's told, or the party as a whole has a story that's told. For example, the game that we're playing right now, we have a series of players in what's called the Gods Pact, which is a group that's trying to make a pact with all the gods in order to save the world from basically Galactus, right? And if they succeed at all this, then great. But, bringing it down a scale, each player has their own goals too. We have, Toshitaki, the monk, who's basically just a happy-go-lucky character. I don't think he's the most successful, but he's still a good character, right? We have Wilhelm, the sort of knave and roguish warrior-y type. I think he's a sorcerer too, or something.
He's a fighter sorcerer. He's also he also enacted. He also fraudulently made himself a reeve of the area, finding a signet ring.
That's a whole story.
Exactly, and that was brilliant.
Yeah, and so like that's that Lucas Fairwright,
Yep.
who is this scrambled chaos jumble of sorcerer, who's basically fighting with multiple personality disorders, and he's got all sorts of issues. And he's got a lot of goals all over in every direction.
Yeah. Well, he's been that's been more or less rectified.
Yeah.
That's
And that's part of the story. Is like he became in this particular case, his story, not the GM story, his story and the player's story. By interacting with the setting specific, entities, was able to tell a tale without the GM's planning, like a little bit of planning in order, like, because GMs are supposed to be doing things. They're arbitrating these situations. But you didn't make this shit up. Like, you weren't just like, yes, the PCs are going to travel into his mind, forgotten, like, Incredible World style, or whatever that sci-fi movie is, and deal with demons in his head and do this stuff. And
I actually ended up facilitating that and coming up with a lot of the structure for that, because I sat down with Phil and I was like, okay, well, this is your character's backstory. What do you want for your character, future tense? Like, I had to sit down and he had to reiterate what his character's narrative was, what he wanted in terms of goals. He said he wanted to be a whole person, and I'm like, okay, well, then I kind of made it happen in that way.
But did you do that before or after we had married ourselves to that course of action?
I did it after the fact.
Exactly. So that was the player's plot, and you as the GM facilitated the barriers that we as players have to overcome in doing the thing we want to do.
For sure.
So in this story, we got in there and did that thing. And so we had him, and then we've got Preacher Caleb, who's like the glue here, and he's his character's story, like, outside of this whole God's Pact thing, which is really just a basic Lord of the Rings style, like, travel from guy to guy. But inside that, this character has had ups and downs of hubris and envy and just like attaining power and losing power, and I think his spine was broken for a while. He had all sorts of crap, and he made deals with evil gods, and Preacher Caleb has had a whole, you could write a book about Preacher Caleb.
Yeah.
And all of the stories that he's told. And then my character's ruled the god of grand battles and high adventure, and he's just a guy who's just like everybody's great. We should all get on a sweet ride.
He's like a Russian Bruce Campbell in my mind.
Kind of, yeah. He is a Russian Bruce Campbell. Yeah, that's and I find that his goal is to sort of keep them focused on the main plot.
Which is an interesting tool to have, right?
Yeah.
Is that, but though, like you said it yourself, he is a tool to keep the party on the tracks. That is the plot.
And they can choose to just disregard it because they're the chosen ones. I'm not going to say no as a player. I'll go along with whatever because that's part of the story, and the story is important.
Well, that's the problem that I find that a lot of people have, is that they are so concerned about their party being on rails and following this thing. And I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
My thing is that when I do a setting and I know what my starting is going to be and my final boss and everything else, and certain events I want to have, it's already predetermined that I will somehow make the majority of those things happen.
Yeah.
But it's the illusion of choice is a really good tool I tend to use. So, and I know that you're not a particular fan of it, judging from your facial expression.
I would say that I suffer from this same problem, and I choose those words very carefully, because I find that if I do this and I have a grand final battle in mind, and this is as a GM something that keeps me excited about the game, is trying to get them to the grand final battle, right? But that's a problem, because if the PCs don't, I get disappointed as a GM. I get despondent about the game. I start losing desire to play it. The game starts failing.
Yeah.
From the GM perspective. So if they think my plot is stupid and doesn't matter, if they're not heading towards the grand final battle, rather than become monster hunters and fight the great freaking super monster at the end, They instead open an inn and have to deal with office politics, in the city of Crane or whatever.
Yeah.
Both are excellent stories, but the problem is, I as the GM had planned for the great monster at the end. Well, it turns out there is no great monster.
Well, I ran into a similar problem. I had 3 different parties. I had this dungeon made, and 3 parties died at the very beginning of the dungeon, not because of anything really I did, but because of, surprisingly enough, like self-cannibalism. Like the party would just
Players kill players not GMs.
No, and that's the thing though too, and it almost creates a weird power dynamic because you actually start questioning yourself. You're like, are my monsters good enough? Because these guys are doing like a good job by themselves. But I ended up having this dungeon, and like kind of back to that rule, like the world's always going regardless of the inert of the players. The thing is about having something like structured as a DM that is always ongoing, always there within your setting, to me is one of those core things of a GM setting and plot. Like and sometimes though it's not necessarily favored, sometimes you have to make a situation where the players have no other choice but to work together. Like they could F off and go and create an inn, but meanwhile, like say an army of undead is ravaging the land, and they're going to make it towards those people anyways, and they're eventually going to end up having to fight zombies at some point, regardless of how much they want to create the rough and tumble in or whatever. It's also like I've used other things though too, where the party wakes up and they're on a slave ship, and they all get to recant on how they were captured by slavers in their own way, so they create their own little narrative. But having those things that automatically bond people together socially, and having that struggle kind of really gets that kind of pre-game over with, and it makes that sense of camaraderie, so they don't want to necessarily leave each other. And meanwhile, like if they manage to escape the slavers, they go to town and they realize they want to go their own separate ways, or if they want to help each other make a living and get back on their feet, that's entirely up to them. So what are your thoughts on that? Kind of that, not I want to say funneling, but creating a pre-game situation where the players mandatorily have to work together, that isn't just in a tavern, that is say something along the lines of being captured by slavers, you're all in the belly of a ship.
Yeah.
One of you snuck a lockpick in your butt.
Yeah, so in that situation, that's the pre-game.
Yes.
And so we have to run under the assumption in your scenario that they've all accepted the pre-game.
Yes, they have to.
Otherwise, the game doesn't even start.
Yeah, because then it's all like, well, sorry.
You're all slaves, but we don't want to play slaves. You're all slaves. And we can already see, like, just with this example, if they are all like, we don't want to play slaves. Well, you all start as slaves in a slave galley. The game's already off on the wrong foot. And
well, that's why I post the pregame first, so people are like, you know what, I want to hop in on that. Then people sign up.
Yeah. So failure, like failure to adhere to rule 1, your plot is stupid and it doesn't matter, doesn't mean that your game will fail.
No.
But it means that success will happen in spite of your incompetence at this by ignoring this rule. So like take that example, the slaving things. Like, you're all slavers. We don't want to be slaves. Well, you're all slavers and you're not playing. So your PC's groan and say, fine, we're slaves. And then they work through your plot until they can get to a point where they can be themselves again.
Yeah.
And if you continue to like, oh, well, you're slaves and you escaped, but don't worry, it turns out you're still slaves of a bigger enemy. You live in a Truman Show now, or something stupid. Like, something really absurd that's like completely goes against everything that they wanted to play.
Yeah.
Your game, like, they might groan and accept and be like, yeah, the game was pretty good. It had a plot. It was kind of neat, I guess. I wasn't really into it because my character wasn't there. Like, I don't know. Or I guess if you were like literally like freaking super Game of Thrones writer, they might get enthralled by your plot and then adopt it as their own.
Mm-hmm.
But in which case, then they've adopted it as their own, and you're just...
Well, it's almost like, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth here, but it's almost like you're saying that pre-game is the entirety of the GM's plot, people obviously have to be agreeable to it, so they have to sign up, because otherwise there's no sense in them playing.
If the GM is going to produce a plot, like
Yeah.
if that's the way that the game is structured first, it's like,
Yeah.
hey guys, I want to run a game where you guys start off as slaves. You know, yeah, okay, that's where the plot starts and ends for the GM.
Yeah.
And when the players all accept it, they've accepted that. But after that point, where they've started with that scenario, and now you're all slaves in the slave pits, all the players have adopted that plot. Now you've given that plot to those players. Session 1 begins. The players now have the plot.
Yeah.
What do? Here are the walls, here are the chains, here are all the things. Slaver frickin' Roxor with his knife hand. He doesn't want to take your shit. Swearing seems to have gone out the window. But the players have developed this plot now.
Yeah.
And so, if they all accept, then that's great. But that's where the DM's plot ends. I'd like to touch on a point, and I was thinking about it on my drive here, because, I didn't really prepare for this, but I had talking points in my head.
For sure.
One of the biggest problems I find with GMs that start is they get it in on their idea, because one of the slang terms for GM is storyteller. And you are not a storyteller. When you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, you are a player as well. If you are a storyteller, then we should all just sit around a fire and listen to you talk. But you're not doing that. You're a game master. This implies that there's a game involved, not a story. All right? Like, there's a story, but, like, it's not you telling a story. You're not a storyteller. You're the master of a game. And if you approach this as if you want to tell a choose-your-own-adventure story with little rails, right? Your game is probably, like, it has a very good chance of being rejected. And I remember experiencing this many times in university before I sort of came to these ideas, where it's just like, guys, we're all going to start a game. And they're like, yeah, that's great. And then they all make really out there characters, because when you've played enough games, all your characters become out there.
You feel like people get bored and they want to make, like, outrageous things?
Sure. But, like, especially when they're not making coherent characters, they're just like, yeah, I'm some, hamburger elemental, to coin a phrase from somebody. Another guy plays like a minotaur angel, and the third guy will decide he wants to be a living blob of goo, and the fourth guy is a dragon who gives luck to people, even though he's level 1, doesn't have the stats for it, but that's what he is. I'm a luck dragon. What does that mean? I don't know.
So I have a hard time with those characters, because just on my taste alone, and that's solely based on just my personal interest opinion.
I hate the templates. Templated characters are the worst thing that ever happened to D&D. It's just terrible. Some people love it. I understand it gives a lot of variance or variety or whatever, but I just think it's a bunch of trash. It was like Wizards didn't balance these templates like in any sense. I think Lich was like +4. But lycanthropy was like +7 or something stupid. Like, you're an immortal wizard, +4.
Was this third?
This was third that I'm talking about. And 3.5, I think, as well.
Yeah.
But even still, like, I'm sure 5th is no better. 4th is definitely not better. I don't even think they gave you the option in 4. I don't think they gave you the option in 5th.
You could be a Lich in 4th, except it was...
Wasn't it just story-based, though?
There was a ritual, and then there was some other things, but, like, you had to... More or less, like, the long and short of it is you had to homebrew it.
But it doesn't give you an effective character level.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't really do anything, and it's... It almost negates some of the other things you've done. Like, I don't understand if I were to transform into a Lich with a phylactery, why I would lose spells and things like that. Like, I don't... Like, that's something you would obviously want to retain.
You'd have to write a story about why that's the case, and I could like posit based on some writings I've done, like why it might happen, because Liches are my favorite. But it could just be that their divine vessel, aka their corporeal form, was shattered, and as a result, they lost the aggregated memories in their head, which is part of their soul, and so yada yada yada. Yeah. They lost experience points.
Numbers have to represent something.
Yeah. And that's one of the other rules, but we'll get into that later. So in your talking, in our discussion, I'll just go through some of these points to see if we're on the same page. So GM plot is a series of linear events. Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Player plot is fluid, meaning that they're making decisions all the time based on stuff. Like it's not a series of linear events because they don't have control over it.
And I would also add, like, as a DM, like, you have to be reactive to your players as much as your players have to be reactive to you.
Brings me to my next little point here is
there we
good
go.
GMs adapt to player plot by using the setting entities to interact with the players. Right? So, you know, your walls, your dungeons, your characters, your NPCs, your monsters, all of this stuff interacts with the players in certain ways. Right? And you as the GM assemble this into a cohesive vision of what's happening. But ultimately, the players always, because they always have the choice to say, nah, I'm not going into the dungeon. Or, I convinced the goblin to join my team. Or, I cut off his arms and legs and turn him into a personal utility pillow.
Oh, you put
Which my players have done once, and I really didn't like that game.
you put the wand of Orcus in your storyline.
That's right.
I now have the wand of Orcus as the PC.
Oh man, yeah. I've broken so many modules because modules are so stupid and don't take into account the dumbness of their own of like there's a trap. It's like, okay, well, I collect the trap and use it against all the enemies in the rest of the dungeon, and then the GM's just like, can you do that? And like, why wouldn't I be able to do it? Like, I am like an arcanist, and I took engineering. Like, I could see where the trap is and what parts I can cut out that aren't the trap, and we could set up a rudimentary cart and move this trap around. So your big Tesla coil that you were trying to hit us with is now our super friend, and we're just going to nuke everything in the dungeon. And then the GM is just like, well, that's stupid. And I'm like, well, is it going to happen or not? Like, well, tell me why it won't. And usually they go up, 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 and I'm like, yeah, okay, well, so we get it.
Yeah, you have to reward that ingenuity.
Yeah.
Right? And whatever you, as a DM you throw in, understand that your players certainly can and will use it against you.
Yes.
That also...
But that's part of their story. So it's okay to be powerful.
It's okay to be powerful.
Which is another rule.
I think though, like, looking at this discussion and whatnot, where it says, like, plot doesn't matter, I think that's where people would tend to get a little stifled, is at the definition of plot versus
your plot as the GM.
Your plot as the GM. Exactly.
That's why it's your plot is stupid, not plot is stupid, because it isn't. Plot is the core of the game. But whose plot are we following here? Are we following the GM's plot, go kill Rathion the dragon, or are we following the plot of the players who want to open an inn on the other continent where Rathion has no power?
Well, I think that ultimately too, it opens up that door, is that a lot of things are dependent on GM stylings too, at least in my opinion, because I ran into a situation where I was playing a game with someone, and it was a bit of a game on rails, and it was a one-off, which I think is really acceptable. One of the more acceptable reasons to have a game on rails is having a brief 5 to 6 session game, and that's it. Because obviously you want it to end somewhere. The thing was, though, is that playing it and hearing them out, hearing the story, hearing what the goals were, and realizing that I can make my character work within those means, and would this be something my character would be interested in, was very, very important.
Yep.
The big issue with say short-term games versus long-term games. Long-term games, if you start losing focus on what your story is, players can lose focus on what their story is. But having something that is short-term, you understand that the conclusion is also inevitable. It is short, it's sweet, and that I think you're more enticed to follow the story than it is if it feels more open world. And I've seen people play, like, styling once again is very important, because I've seen people play where they almost have like a pre-constructed character, pre-constructed storyline. Like, I've played things out of books.
I've played those too.
And they're fun. Yeah. They're fun. But once again, though, too, it's solely based on styling. Like, I've played games where they were sandboxed, and so sandboxed to the point where I almost didn't want to be there. Because if I wanted to play The Sims, I'd stay home and play The Sims. Like, I need goals, I need challenges. Sometimes as a character a character who's just waiting to see what the world around him has to offer. because I've played those characters and I've seen those characters as well. It's sometimes hard to want to play a game where there's no immersion, there's no setting standard, things like that.
Yep. So let me go through these points, and I'm thinking we're getting to the point where we're sort of on the same page, and I would say we're probably in agreement for the most part
on a lot of these points.
I can't think of one where we're totally in agreement, but not in agreement. But
yeah,
let's go through the short term versus long term thing. So would you say that in a long term game, it consists of a series of sort of player story arcs, like the group dynamic has arcs in the story that they're playing?
I think it does. I would also add to, like, you can have a game where there's a lot of player arcs and there's a main story arc.
Okay. So would you say that perhaps a short-term game, though a little bit more compact, would just be almost the same as one of these single story arcs?
I almost would want to just say that it's dependent on GM stylings. Like a short-term game,
as I said at the beginning, that's not an argument.
You don't think so?
It doesn't count. Depending on your player base, or if your players all agree, is not an argument, because it's the lack of an argument.
Well, I don't want to say it's based solely on the players. Like it has a lot to do with the GM, because you'll have to excuse me if I'm not getting exactly what you're saying, but from what I understand, we're saying that short term is just one, more or less, just one plot point instead of multiple.
One arc in a long story.
I don't think it necessarily has to be.
No, but would you say that a long story consists of a series of small arcs? And although they're different, like a single 5-shot, like a 5-session campaign with a with a basically it's like you've entered the town and the town has a trouble.
Yeah. Right.
It's that kind of a game where it's like this is a prolonged campaign, but it's only going to be like 5 or 6 sessions because it's not a very long. It's not a very long campaign.
Yeah.
Right? Like this isn't going to be you're level 1, we're going to level 20, and we're taking this for 3 years of gaming, or whatever. Like this is just a little story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that the larger plots consist of smaller stories like that?
Larger plots, yes.
Okay. So one of these little stories, you're saying is more linear, right?
Yes.
Okay. I would argue
more often than not, I should say.
I would argue that the only reason that this is the case is because it starts at the beginning and it's smaller, right? And we'll use the most extreme example with pre-con characters. We got a module, whatever, right?
Yeah.
We've established in the pre-game players can adopt a plot, like they can adopt a story, right?
Yeah.
So if a player is choosing to play one of your pre-con characters with motivations and stats and everything's pre-made for them, they're basically, as a player, saying, I am going to play, let's say, Rexar or whatever, because we're going to play all the Hearthstone characters or something.
Yeah.
I'm going to play Rexar. We're all gonna play everybody. You're going to play Gul'dan, yada, yada, yada. And we all have our motivations. We're all going to play that game. So they've adopted it. That's their story now. Right? And we're all playing for a reason because, we know that the game is going to be all of these Hearthstone characters have gotten together and we're all going to fight Mal'Ganis. Right? Whatever. Right? And then that's going to be the plot. We know it's going to be about 4 or 5 sessions. It's a nice, fun little game. We're all going to explore what these characters would be like if they're all together. And at the end of the day, we're going to kill Mal'Ganis because that's the reason why we're here in the first place. Right? That's, to me, an example, like I said, of the characters adopting that story. So, and the reason why it seems much more linear, why it would be so much more linear, is simply because it's shorter. And all the characters have that like the GM has handed you pre-existing sort of like templates of motivation and all this stuff, and you've accepted that. And so that linearness is only good insofar as the GM has handed it to you. Like once you get there, unless the whole session is just like, yeah, you've all come together and you're going into the 5 levels of dungeon that I've arranged for you, and those 5 levels just happen to be on, there's nothing else you can do about it. You know the parameters of this dungeon. You know you want to go through the dungeon. Yeah, the players might go on a linear dungeon adventure. But that's only because they've accepted that in the early game. And that then it's their plot. Like, yeah, it just happens to align with the plot that the GM wanted this time. You got lucky, because this is the game you set up as the GM, and they took it and said, okay, that's great, and then they ran with it. But say it wasn't a linear adventure so much. Say it was just like, this is going to be a 5-session plot. You want to capture King Louis of the Thieves Guild. You all are these characters, and here's the city of Torgos. Go find King Louis and bring him to justice. And now the PCs are like, well, we all want to kill King Louis, but we don't know how to do it because the GM hasn't given us those rails. Or if the GM is like, he has these rails in place and he gives them to you, right? And you as the players go, no, I don't think I want to do that because we're in the city of Torgos. There's all sorts of cool shit in here, and we're going to do it a different way.
Yeah.
What do you do as the GM? Do you get the guards to show up at every corner and tell them to stop?
And that brings up a really good point though too of malleability almost as a GM, or fluidity rather, like bringing that back full circle. Like you have to be prepared almost for the unprepared, and there's a lot of we had mentioned in the beginning too, like there's a fair amount of psychology behind Dungeons and Dragons. If I were to set up a short one-off or whatever you want to call it, and the players instead of like capturing them, they wanted to then put them out of business by making a better thieves guild and do some entrepreneurship thing or whatever, like some underground thing. I would then be like, all right, cool. Well, you reward them by giving them the option, but you make it a challenge in order for them to obtain that reward.
Yeah,
obviously.
and that. So I would say that we would probably be in agreement at this point, saying that the GM's domain really is setting.
Yeah,
or control of the organisms within your setting, and using them to put barriers in front of your players, and or paint the world around them.
Yeah, I would say we're in agreement on a lot of things. I think though my perspective on it is that GM plot is still significant in the sense that it is open, fair, like you have it open, fairly broad, but the players by no means have to follow it if they don't want to, and I think that's really stressing and taxing actually on players when they feel that their character is being corralled, like overtly corralled towards this thing because you wanted to be lazy.
And I think on that you've just explained my point exactly. So unless you have, let's give you some I'll give you some closing comments, just to make your point that I won't interrupt or.
Well, I think first off, I think corralling to a massive degree is it's almost insulting to your players. It is insulting to their characters. Let them play their characters; they want to play it. However, if they do something goofy, if they themselves make something because of their bad playing or good playing, make it difficult for themselves, enact it as such. Just because they want something doesn't necessarily mean they should have it, in my opinion. I think that they should, if they want something, they should work for it. Having the option to have it and not giving it to them are two different things. I think as long as they can create a good argument and a good plan for it, I think they should, and I think that actually falls into plot where you had mentioned that players create their own plot. If their goal is to obtain something, then that's part of their own personal plot as well. I think that setting and plot for a GM kind of go hand in hand. I think that your setting should not necessarily cater to your players, because your setting, your world and whatever will go on even if the players die, and regardless of the decisions they make. I think that the big thing here though is that mentioning that your plot is stupid and doesn't matter is I don't think I still fully agree with that mindset, just because setting and having having a world that continues to go on, having the fluidity behind it, having the characters be able to enact with it, but also somewhat control it through action, through renown, through quests, and everything else is very important. I think that with this, I don't think a plot is necessarily stupid, but I think that players should have free reign to control and affect their environment, like almost we do in real life.
Okay. So, I'll make my closing comments, and I think the closing comment that Swampy just made here is pretty much states my case, almost entirely. You know, the controversial language used is, and your plot is stupid and it doesn't matter. You know, it makes bad feels, but I don't care. I don't care about your bad feels, and I don't care about other GMs' bad feels. Because at the end of the day, Swampy here, who he said he was pro-plot, basically outlined exactly why plot is bad, and it doesn't matter.
I will say plot can be bad. Can be bad.
We've already defined, like I said, we've defined plot as a series of linear events controlled by the GM plot. All right? And we've established that the GM should be an arbiter of the setting's tools. And players are the ones who guide the story of this of a game. And if the players if the GM forces the players into his own corral, the game will more than likely be less fun than if they didn't. And yes, the GM can have very cool and very interesting setting pieces all over the place, and they can have them interact with the players in many fluid ways, but that is not plot, that is setting. Plot is forcing your players to do things that they don't otherwise, or wouldn't otherwise do. Or, if they do it, I'll say that you got lucky and your players adopted your plot. And that might work once or twice, but eventually it's not going to work. And in that moment, you should realize that your plot is stupid. And it doesn't matter. And just let the PCs do what they want to do and put up those barriers that are important to them. Okay.
Don't mind me, I'm just playing hide and seek.
So, with that said, I thank you for listening, if you did listen. And I thank you, Swampy, for coming out and having this discussion with me. That means a lot.
Well, thanks for having me.
I think that helped polish the stone that is this podcast. And if you're interested, if we want to do another one, would you be interested in another one?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And I apologize to anyone listening to the madness that's going on in the background. This is not a professional studio. This is my living room. And we got a really cool mic here, but we also have the family day dinner. I don't know if that totally self-doxes me about what country I'm in, but
yeah, I guess it's family days.
But whatever.
Specific to Canada and mainly one particular province, or maybe one.
I'm not. I don't think I'm attacking the alt-right, so I'm not going to get harassed. So the next podcast that we're going to do is we're going to go through the second rule, and the second rule is slightly less controversial. The games are actually quite... The first one is the most controversial. After that, it kind of gets... they're a little bit more milquetoasty. Setting, though important in the abstract, is only a means of justifying the antagonist forces. Or, if I wanted to be real critical about it, your setting is stupid and doesn't matter.
But we talk about it so much, and it's so good. I like my setting.
Yes. I do like your setting too. Okay, well, thank you for listening. I think that that ends this podcast. You take care. Have a great day.